Hello, I'm Justin Wheeler, and welcome to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. Today, I'm talking to Julia Campbell, the Julia Campbell. If Julia's name is new to you, I highly recommend that you listen in and get ready to start following the type of dynamic, imaginative leader that the nonprofit sector needs. Julia is a nonprofit speaker, fundraising strategist, and social maven who guides nonprofits through the wilderness of digital fundraising, and she does it with warmth and wit. Getting through 2020 has been rough on everyone, and it's put a lot of pressure on nonprofits. Working with organizations across the globe, I've seen the effects, and as a nonprofiteer myself, I've experienced them firsthand. Julia's perspective on the way forward for nonprofits is hopeful, but doesn't rely on luck. She advocates for creative campaigning, democratizing fundraising, and building strong partnerships across nonprofits of all sizes, budgets, and causes. So if you're looking for ideas to seed your plans for a digital future, tune in to my conversation with Julia. You'll find laughs, aha moments, and the realization that you're never alone. Let's dive in.
The best thing that we can do is just raise as much money as possible and then give it to the people around the world.
We set out to raise $1,000 to help this person, but we had no idea how to fundraise.
Then you're doing it wrong.
Okay.
That is unacceptable, and that is not the way to run a board.
Who is this girl, and what's the thought process when you're like, do I include a nickel?
And it snowballs like any peer-to-peer campaign. The more people that view this content, the further and further it grows.
The community raised $55 million in 2019.
The more nonprofits can give their donor base that experience of the impact that's being made on the ground level, there's nothing else you have to give someone. This is Nonstop Nonprofit. All right, well, Julia, welcome to Nonstop Nonprofit. I have been so excited to bring you on the podcast, so thank you so much for making time to join us today.
Aw, thanks, Justin. I'm really excited to be here.
For our listeners, tell them a little bit more about yourself and what you're all about.
So, I'm Julia Campbell. I have run my own consulting business for 10 years. Before that, I was a development director, marketing director, all duties as assigned, getting the balloons for the events and cleaning the coffee maker and doing all the things. And right now I'm currently, I'm a board member, I'm a volunteer. I work in my kids' schools and with several local nonprofits. So I help organizations try to navigate the sort of crazy wilderness of digital fundraising and social media and make some sense of it and hopefully forge a roadmap for success.
That's great. What pushed you from being in the nonprofit, working for a particular organization, to just starting your own thing?
Well, this is a good story. So I'm an accidental consultant.
Okay.
I was laid off from my development director position when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter, who's now 11. So that was not the best time in the world, but it turned into something fantastic because I never would have taken the plunge, I don't think, to go off on my own. I had a trajectory. I was going to be an executive director. I was going to found a nonprofit. I had all of these sort of grand ideas, my 5-year plan, and it really got thrown out the window. And what I found was that I really enjoy working on a variety of causes and a variety of projects. And while I loved being a development director, I really enjoy what I'm doing right now.
That's great. I can resonate with the working with a variety of causes.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to Funraise, I was working on very specific, like single issue nonprofits, like the first Invisible Children, and then second Liberty in North Korea, which is focused on North Korean human rights. Coming over to Funraise, it's been fun to see just the really meaningful different causes that exist across the spectrum of pushing society forward. So I can definitely understand that feeling in working with a variety of different types of causes. So what do your nonprofits, your clients look like? Are they, I imagine they're kind of all over the place, but if you were to describe them, or a few of them at least, what do they look like? And what would you say your superpower is when consulting, whether it's marketing or fundraising, whatever it might be?
Well, I have a variety of consulting clients, and then I also have my online course students. So I run a lot of webinars and online courses and have hundreds of students who I wish I could get to know a little bit better. Sometimes they email me and I talk to them. But for my consulting clients, they're really mostly pretty small organizations, small to mid-size. The vertical. There really is no specific vertical or specific cause area. I've worked with academic research institutions and tiny little food banks and universities, domestic violence and sexual violence, and really everything from animal rights to human rights. My superpower, I feel like, and I'm not trying to brag, but I really do feel like I can relate to a very small organization development director
Hmm.
and that I can get everybody on board. So, you know how organizations tend to be a little bit siloed.
Yep.
So in one of my development director positions, I was actually in an office building completely away from the programs and the executive director and everybody else, completely siloed. And they said, okay, just here, go raise $10 million. We're never going to talk to you. Like, we don't want to hear from you. Just raise it.
Wow.
So I have that background and that experience, but I feel like I can bring people together, the executive director, the marketing, if there is more than one department, which, oftentimes there's not, and speak to the board in a way that helps them understand the importance of investing in digital, or at least understanding some of these digital strategies.
That's great. I have never understood why, and this is a totally side note, but this is why we like several years ago we made a musical, and we have you. I don't know if you've seen it, and
I have
you
not.
haven't
But
seen
I'm
it?
a
Okay.
huge musicals
Okay.
fan.
Well, I'll send you the musical, but the reason why I bring it up is early on when we were starting Funraise, we wanted to put fundraisers in the spotlight, right? Because for too long, it's like they're the people that, like you said, like are segmented,
heroes.
Unsung heroes. It's the program people that are like on the front lines that get all the credit, and we're not in it for credit, but we wanted to make the fundraisers the rock stars, and so we made this musical over the top.
It.
Yeah, so I'll share with you.
What were some of the songs?
Oh man. So the one that's probably the most catchy was, because it was completely written. We had someone here in LA write the lyrics for it.
Amazing.
And I'm a terrible singer, but basically I think the chorus was like, "There's no fun in fundraising," and it was just like over the top. It started black and white, and then it went into like the super colorful production.
Oh,
so
cool.
Yeah, I'll send that over.
So fun, because we need to have some fun sometimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So on the note of working with small nonprofits, development directors with small teams, what are some of the common challenges that you see in the small nonprofit ecosystem?
There are really two main challenges that I see coming up over and over again. One is just feeling like they don't know where to begin. They don't know where to start. They don't know how to prioritize, because oftentimes what happens in the nonprofit sector, as you know, is people are very well-meaning and very passionate, and they might be even a social worker. They might not have any formal training in fundraising or marketing, and then they're thrown into this position because of their passion or their connections. So they have to really learn everything on the spot. And then the second really, I think, might be how to work with the different pieces and the different people in the organization to get the stories and the content and the videos and the photos, and how to feed that digital content beast continually, but also do it in a way that's respectful and ethical, but not just kind of making it up as you go along. Like, how can they create a system to truly work with other people in the organization on the front lines and get those stories and get that content?
That's great. That was definitely our struggle at Liberty North Korea. We were working on a topic that was highly sensitive, and so the North Korean refugees that we were helping, most of the time their identity couldn't be shared. And so we all know, to raise funds, you need to be able to be transparent. You need to prove impact, and typically there's no better impact than an individual willing to share their story. And all of our field program officers were halfway around the world. That was definitely a challenge. Is how do we streamline sort of communication? How do we tell the story in the way that's accurate, that's respectable of the client, and ethical? So that's definitely, I can imagine that makes for some tense conversations early on with nonprofits, because I remember it was a tough topic for us for sure.
And I have worked in domestic violence. I worked in domestic violence for years. I worked at a rape crisis center. I've worked with human trafficking organizations. So I really feel like my passion is helping these kinds of organizations realize that they can share stories in an ethical way without sharing identities. There are workarounds. There are ways that you can still use social media and email and video and not be talking directly to a client who is in your shelter, who is in crisis.
Yeah.
But it took me a very long time to kind of navigate all of that and figure out when you're dealing with confidentiality and people that are actually in danger, like the refugees, and how do you get their story? How do you share it online so that they don't feel like they're defined by it and they still feel like they have agency over what's being told about them and what's being shared?
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. So on the topic of digital fundraising, how do you help organizations level up their online digital fundraising? What are the kind of core principles you bring to help organizations really grow?
I help them with campaign strategy. So I help
Okay.
them see digital fundraising in a holistic way, but how it can fit into what they're already doing. So I don't ever want to come into an organization and say, you have to get on Instagram, or you have to use Facebook fundraising, or you have to use live video, whatever it might be. I take a look at everything going on in the organization and I see where digital can either fill in the gaps or even augment and enhance and up-level things that are already happening. And then creating creative campaigns, hashtags, themes, all sorts of communication, multi-channel campaigns in accordance with the priorities of the organization, whether it be marketing, maybe it's raising awareness, maybe it's advocacy, maybe it is fundraising, maybe it's a little bit of all of those things.
Okay.
And then creating the campaign plan and timeline and calendar so nothing falls through the cracks.
I imagine you're probably pretty busy with Giving Tuesday a few days away.
Yeah, it's interesting. My clients right now, there's a lot of skepticism around Giving Tuesday, and
Okay.
I feel like I do a lot of answering questions. A
Okay.
lot of why should I do it? How should I do it? There's myths out there, there's misconceptions. There's a lot of false information, I think, about what it is and how to use it. So
Yeah.
a lot of the education I've been doing is how to participate without raising money. Like there are
Okay.
tons of ways you can share, donor thank yous. You can use it for gratitude. You can use it to kick off year-end fundraising. You can do a specific campaign. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that you can use it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of questions certainly around
What would you say are the most prominent or important questions organizations are asking?
How can I use it? And how can I cut through the clutter
Yeah.
and create an impact on Giving Tuesday? And what I say to that is, you can't cut through the clutter. That's the wrong question to ask, because if you have not built up a community before Giving Tuesday, simply screaming at a bunch of strangers and taking out a bunch of ads and yelling into the wilderness, that's not going to work on a day like Giving Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I don't actually think Giving Tuesday is all that effective for donor acquisition. I see it as effective for donor retention.
Yeah.
And I see it as a way to get your donors and supporters that really love you to spread the word about you and to raise awareness about you. But I don't really see it as effective to try to get 500,000 new donors on Giving Tuesday when there's so much noise out there.
Totally. I 100% agree with that. Giving Tuesday really is for your base. It's not an acquisition day. I'm a fan of Giving Tuesday and for organizations to do it. And the reason for that is because I think if you're focused on your community, your donors, typically like you're going to, you do something, you throw out a campaign, you send out some emails, whatever it might be, your donors will give, and it won't be their their annual gift. It'll be their second or third gift to the organization. So you see a lot of low-hanging fruit on Giving Tuesday. Organizations, make these smaller donations, but it adds up if you can effectively, reach your base. But totally agree with you. Organizations that spend time trying to acquire a bunch of new donors, I think that's a bit wishful thinking, right? Because there's so much noise.
Focusing on the Facebook match and everything else that I'm not even going to go into. That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point of Giving Tuesday is generosity and democratizing philanthropy, making giving, normalizing giving, making it seem, and this is the reality, anyone can make a difference with even just $5 or $10. And I don't just talk to nonprofits on Giving Tuesday or year round. I talk to donors. So I have people calling me, emailing me, messaging me and saying, Julia, can $10 really make a difference? I'm worried about overhead costs. I'm worried about what I read in the news. There is so little trust in our institutions and our organizations and our government. There's so little trust right now that I really think nonprofits can leverage these kind of days when there's a lot of buzz and a lot of news coverage and a lot of social media mentions to normalize giving, to show people that $10 really, really, really can help, and that everyone, no matter what their budget is, can still give back. Even if they can't give money, they can still be generous. They can still be kind.
Yeah. So that's a great segue to looking at sort of the landscape of where we're at today. We've got 6 weeks left, at least at the recording of this podcast, of 2020. How do you see sort of current events shaping online fundraising, organizations' ability to raise during, a pandemic, and obviously other important sort of social issues that are happening today? How do you see current events kind of impacting all this?
I think that we're going to have a giving season like no other, to be honest. I think that if you're asking right now, you will be receiving. So a lot of organizations, the studies that I've been reading have been fearful that they're not going to raise as much as they did in 2019. And that might be true, but you can't raise money if you're not asking.
Yep.
You can't raise money if you don't give your donors the opportunity to give. And if you're not asking, it might actually be kind of selfish of you. You're not giving your donors a chance to have agency and control over the great big world that we can't control. But if I have $10 and I can give it to that food bank, or if I can say, you know what, I don't want any Christmas gifts this year, I want to donate all the proceeds to this local organization, that gives me a feeling of control. And it helps me sort of process a lot of the things in my life that I can't control right now.
Yeah.
So I just think that if you're asking in an authentic and genuine way, you don't have to tie it to COVID. And that's the trend that I see right now. Well, my organization is not a front-facing COVID charity. I'm not an essential worker. I'm not in healthcare. I'm not providing PPE. So I don't think that I should be bothering my donors or asking for support. And to that, I would say, well, do you need it? Do you need the support?
Yeah.
And how are you going to use it? Because you're still solving a problem. Your problem doesn't go away just because we're in a pandemic. Whether it's a community arts center or an animal rights group, whatever it is, the problem you're solving does not go away. In fact, it's probably just exacerbated by everything that's going on in the world. So I would say, the trend tends to be, well, donor fatigue, or we don't want to ask, or we're not a front-facing charity, COVID charity. But I would say you have to really ignore all of that and remember why your donors love you, and remember the problem that you're solving and why you are vital, and the change that you're trying to make.
Totally. Yeah, I think Next have to put out some really great research on pandemic fundraising, and specifically,
and Stephen Screen too, the Better Fundraising.
Okay,
Co.
I don't think I've seen that yet. I'll check that out. But what I loved about it specifically, I was looking at email fundraising, and basically organizations that were frontline responders and organizations that had nothing to do with the pandemic and were fundraising and not mentioning coronavirus, then frontline workers mentioning coronavirus, they were actually raising at the same rate. So donors weren't like jumping ship or anything like that. It's just staying authentic to your brand, to your promise, to your donors and to your beneficiaries. I think is important.
And donor fatigue is a myth. I believe it's a myth. I think that donors are fatigued with crappy fundraising.
What's crappy fundraising?
Only emailing me on Giving Tuesday and having the subject line be "It's Giving Tuesday. Give us a gift."
Yeah.
Only emailing me every 6 months, 3 months when you need something.
Yep.
Talking about your organization and not talking about the actual impact that you're making. And there are probably lots of examples, but the point being, not trying to build a community, treating fundraising as a pure transaction and not as a relationship building tool. Yeah.
I got an email a few weeks ago. It was actually from an intern, which nothing wrong with that. But it was the organization's message was the organization is going to go under if you don't donate today. That was like basically the theme of the email. I'm like, Yeah, I'd put that in the category
What's
of
going to
crappy
happen
fundraising.
in the next few days then?
Exactly. Not a good investment in from my perspective. When organizations ask donors to save their organization, I think that's when there's a big problem with the overall messaging and so forth. The other thing that I see with this is there's also organizations. So I don't know if you saw our announcement last week. We actually made Funraise free.
That's amazing.
And the reason for that is there's 80% of nonprofits, right, that are operating here in the United States just don't have the same sort of budgets as the larger, more sophisticated fundraising organizations. And so we saw this trend within our customer base where they all looked the same in regards to like their budgets, and we're like, how do we, to your point earlier, democratize fundraising? I think it's also giving them the tools that larger organizations have access to. And so we made Funraise free, and it's been awesome to see just the appetite for a product that will hopefully help organizations, run their fundraising operations in a more meaningful and thoughtful way. That's at least that's the goal.
Or at least take a step into the water, because it's no commitment. If it's free, you can see if it works. You can establish your brand. You can try to use the tools, and it seems like it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah. Totally. And at the very least, give organizations a beautiful donor experience. With how much great product there's in the market today, there's just no more excuses for someone's donation page to look like I'm filling out a college application. It's just those days need to be behind us. We need to catch up with the rest of the world and really modernize sort of that experience to keep donors engaged.
If you think about customer experience, would you accept that kind of thing on any website that you checked out?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, if I see a Facebook ad, I want to go from the Facebook ad to the product to PayPal to like 3 clicks, and I've got the product.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what we expect in our digital life as consumers. So that's what we expect in our digital life as donors. And there has to be that. I mean, there's that huge gap, I think, right now. So that's awesome.
So thank you. So talking about like this divide, specifically like the digital divide, have you seen this exacerbated during COVID? Right, there's within organizations, whether it's your own client base or the research that you're looking at, have you seen a greater divide in sort of organizations' ability and propensity to go digital, or have you seen it kind of equal out or level out?
I have seen a lot of organizations trying to cut and paste non-digital ways into digital. So their golf tournament, that is an actual golf tournament where you have to play golf, that is not necessarily going to translate. I know there are platforms and people have done really creative things, but that's what I've been seeing a lot is, we have this gala that is $250 a person per head, and we have it every year. And now we're just going to have to translate that over to digital. Well, it may or may not work. So you can't really cut and paste the old ways into the new ways. I think we have to be looking for brand new and innovative solutions. And I have seen a lot of organizations able to pivot, which, we always hate that word. It's overused, but pivot and adapt to this new reality. And I think it's the organizations that understand that as fundraisers, we have a responsibility to reach 5 or 6 distinct generations of donors. I mean, you have got the matures, the boomers, the millennials, Gen X, Gen Z. And if you're going to be sustainable, you have to have a strategy, a multi-channel strategy to reach all of these different generations of donors, however they want to be reached. And that's very challenging. I mean, I understand that. We're so used to maybe only trying to reach one generation of donors or 2, but at this point in time, in order to stay viable and relevant, you really need to have a strategy to be acquiring younger donors as you still retain the older donors as well.
So what do you tell organizations? I imagine you hear this just with your background and expertise. I hear it all the time. It's, our donors just don't do that, or our donors don't give that way. And the organizations, average at the crunching the data, average donor age is like 65 years old, which is great. I mean, they're very generous donors. But how do you respond to organizations when they tell you, our donors just don't give online?
That's a myth, because we know that older people are shopping online. And what I would say to that is, it's our fault. It's our fault. Let's look at our stuff. Let's look at our donation pages. Let's look at when we send an email. If I click on it from my phone, does it go to a seamless mobile optimized page where I can just enter some information and be done? But like you said, is it a college application? Is it a PDF? What is it? So I think we have to reverse engineer a lot of this, where we say, okay, our donors are not giving on our website. Well, have you told anyone that is something that is an option to them? And what is the donor experience like? And you must hear this all the time, Justin, that infamous, what is it? Online giving's only 10% of giving, whatever it is these days, 12% of giving. But what I say to that is completely in line with e-commerce, because shockingly, e-commerce is that exact same rate, 12, 13%. Because it's not taking into account things like groceries and automobile payments and house payments and things like that.
Right.
So when we look at those statistics and say, well, old people aren't online, we make these generalizations. Online giving isn't a huge piece of giving. But then we actually look at our day-to-day life and how we function and how our parents function and how our children function. The story, I think, is incredibly different. So I would never assume anything unless you talk to your donors. And like I said before, you're going to have a handful that don't want to give online. You're going to have a whole heck of a lot of donors that do want to give online. So have options for both.
Totally. Yeah. 100% agree with that. And when organizations tell me it's only 10 to 12%, I'm like, but you're talking about $40 billion, right?
Yeah,
like,
you're talking about that bequest that Harvard University got for the new medical building. Like that does.
It's too big to ignore for 100%, regardless of what the what piece of the pie it is in total philanthropic dollars. But it's also it's growing rapidly, and it's one of the only, if you take a look over the last several decades, it's actually one of the only revenue channels that can sustain global recessions, pandemic. It's a channel. Individuals don't stop giving regardless of what's happening because they're emotionally compelled to do so, and I think online giving is highly effective to create emotional appeals, to your community and to donors and so forth.
And the other thing is, you can use it in accordance with other things. You can still make phone calls. You can still send your print newsletter. You can still do all of these things. Yeah. But just give people the option to donate via their phones. Totally. That's certainly where younger donors are going.
The other good excuse is like the cost. People say, oh, the credit card processing fees and so forth. But it's like, what I like to think about is, okay, like let's say you received 100 donations, $100 each. What if that was 100 checks mailed to you? Like, what's the cost to process 100 individual checks?
And the errors that could
totally,
happen.
Totally. Yeah. So that I think, I'm glad we're aligned there. I mean, it's definitely something that I hope to see more organizations. And I do think that smaller organizations have the ability to grow this channel faster. There's less red tape, less bureaucracy, and they can experiment a lot more and do it faster and quicker. And
they can get their donors used to it.
Exactly.
So they bring on new donors and they just get them used to it. This is the way we fundraise. This is the way we do it. This is an option available to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. So I want to go back to something you also said about sort of, not taking your offline things and putting a digital label onto it. So I think that's super interesting and something that we've also seen. What, like, maybe one or two examples of a campaign that you've seen that's been new, creative, something you've appreciated that was, I don't know, I was kind of putting you on the spot here. So if you have an example, would love to see what you've seen or heard or experienced.
Well, it wasn't really intended to be a fundraising campaign.
Okay.
But I have absolutely loved how museums and aquariums have banded together. And there's been a bunch of different hashtags. One was the strangest thing you found or creepiest object. So if you look at the hashtag creepiest object on Twitter, a lot of museums around the country are posting their creepiest object that's in their museum, whether it's a skull or someone had like a pile of hair or I don't know, but it's really creative. And what I loved about that is that everyone's retweeting each other and sharing and lifting each other up. Yeah. And it resulted in a lot of national news coverage and a lot of increased interest and memberships for these museums and aquariums that, of course, have closed doors. So the creativity that I've seen is how can you, when your doors are closed, still be top of mind and still be relevant and even just be fun and be entertaining.
Yeah.
And a campaign that one of the campaigns that I worked on that, if an organization is saying to itself, well, we are really small, we're all volunteer run, we can't use social media, we can't use online fundraising. The National Filipino American Museum in California is all volunteer run. Their executive director started on March 17th, which is literally when the shit hit the fan. And I know this is a family show, but he started that day, and he took one of my webinars and he started a fundraising campaign on Facebook just to see what would happen. And he ended up raising $2,000 pretty much overnight because he told his story of how his parents came to America and what he has experienced and what the Filipino American community means to him and the museum means to him, and spoke from the heart. And since then, he's done live streams, he's done concerts, they've done so much virtual programming in order to raise these badly needed funds because, of course, their doors are closed.
Yeah.
So the key is he just tried something and he said, I'm just going to try it, and it's going to cost me nothing because I'm just going to put my story out there. And if it doesn't resonate, it doesn't. And if it does, then that's great. So I think just taking that little baby step, like if you think of something, if you think maybe this could work, then trying it out and just seeing, because a lot of this is just testing. A lot of this is just experimenting and seeing what works.
Yeah. Another campaign I saw, and this one's more political, but it was, I thought it was brilliant, regardless of who you voted for. But it was a campaign called Defeat by Tweet. And have you seen this?
No, I didn't. Defeat by Tweet? Oh, I want to look it up.
Defeat by Tweet. And basically this organization was asking for people to pledge to donate every time Trump tweeted.
I did see this.
Okay.
I did see this.
Original goal was a couple million. They've now raised over 4 million, and they're on their way to raise a bunch more. And now their thinking is, how do we evolve this as a strategy once Trump's out of office? For
he'll still be tweeting.
He'll still be tweeting. That's true. But anyway, so that I love that sort of creative thinking, and then also going back to your point on just telling your story. Working with this organization, it's a smaller organization, but I was super compelled just by, there's this rare disease, 30 kids in the world have it. It's called CHAMP1, and this community of families here in the U.S. Are basically trying to raise funds for medical research to find a cure for, it's like gene therapy that needs to happen. And over the last 5 or 6 years, they've maybe raised $20,000 or $30,000. Wow. And these stories and their kids are so compelling. And so they launched a peer-to-peer campaign, integrated it with Facebook, and they launched a couple days ago, and they're breaking on 15 grand already.
Wow,
in the first few
for
days.
a tiny little rare disease.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, their goal story is 250 to kickstart the actual research.
Yep.
But I think that's the power of digital. You just never know when a story is going to land and how it's going to, impact and who your donor base is going to be. So that's really the power of what the internet can provide to nonprofit organizations.
And it just gives people that agency. Like I keep saying, if that was my niece and who had this disease, I could then ask my community on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn to support the fundraiser for my niece. So me. And if you're friends with me and you hear that, you're much more likely to pay attention to the story that I'm telling. And then I can help raise money for this other organization. So it's got that ripple effect. I love that story.
Yeah. So turning the page a bit, a couple questions before we wrap up. I'd like to talk a little bit more about sort of just the collective community nonprofits offer, because I think it's truly remarkable to see how organizations will rally together to support each other. I think of one of our customers, Innocence Project. Shortly after the murder of George Floyd, they sent out an email to their entire listserv promoting different organizations working on the front lines. And you would never see a business do this. You never see a business promote their competitors. And so what are your thoughts around this type of community? Is it healthy? Does it stall growth, do you think? What are sort of the what gets you excited about this being a value in the nonprofit culture?
I love that. And I saw that a lot, actually. I saw that pretty frequently where organizations were shouting out other organizations that were working in racial justice and anti-racism, because not everyone can be a superstar in that area. Not everyone's an expert in that area. And I really respected organizations that said, this is something that's important to us. We're not the experts. Here are the experts.
Yeah.
And we're going to highlight them. I really wish more organizations would do this because, like I say, I mean, that kind of was the point of a Giving Tuesday,
Yeah.
was to normalize this idea of giving and understand that we are not in competition with each other. I do not say, oh, I like this organization's annual appeal letter better than this one. I give with my heart. Most of us give with our heart. They give to causes that are important to them. And I think it's incredible when people are showcasing other organizations like that. So I wish that I would see more of that. I wish I would see local coalitions. I mean, we see like local foundations doing a great job of that. We see local nonprofit networks and associations doing a great job. But I would love to see sort of an informal coalition of nonprofits locally or regionally, or maybe all working on the same issue together, doing things like that. And the zoos and aquariums do it. They do that on Giving Tuesday. They have a Giving Zoo Day. And they highlight each other and they talk about each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm sure there's more examples on Giving Tuesday than just Giving Zoo Day. But I think that using the news coverage, using the fact that we are primed for year-end giving, we want to give back. It's Thanksgiving, it's the holidays, it's that kind of season. How can you maybe promote maybe 5 other organizations in your community? I think what happens is nonprofits are worried it's going to get political. They're worried they're going to leave somebody out. They're worried they're going to hurt someone's feelings. They're worried that maybe they will get $5 less. But we really have to just start taking risks and start understanding that the sector itself, I mean, we're poised to lose several thousand nonprofits this year because of the effects of COVID. So the ones that remain, we need to stand up for each other. I mean, we really need to realize that quote that you shared, that I absolutely love that quote, we're not all in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I think that the way that organizations can leverage this sort of community is to find strong partnerships, right? Or even like you see this a lot in the for-profit space, but where maybe it's not a core sort of competency of ours, this organization does it better, and there's opportunity for program partnership, right? Where funds can be shared and split. I think there's so much more room for innovation at that level because there's already the appetite. You already see nonprofits really, gravitate towards this type of climate, and so creating some more structure or opportunity to promote it, I think could be super interesting.
Well, Vu Lei of Nonprofit AF, when he was the executive director of the Rainier Corps, he did just that.
Oh, cool.
At his particular organization. So he would invite other nonprofits and they would share an accountant. They would share an administrative assistant. They would share a copier because he's like, why do I need this photocopier? I'd make like 2 copies a day. Like let's let other people rent it or pay for paper or help pay for ink. So the way he saw it, that I think is just really brilliant, is that why do we all need to have a separate accountant, a separate HR person? If you're a very, very small organization, why do we need to have a separate copier? Why do we need to have a separate database? Like, why can't we all come together, and making sure that everything's proprietary and client confidentiality is of course followed, but just trying to think outside the box. Like, why do we have to have these hierarchies and these structures that were set up hundreds of years ago? Like, why can't we just sort of blow everything up and figure out what works, and just rather than following these paths that I think we've been told that we have to follow?
Yeah, no, agree. And oftentimes it's a lot of principles that, I think there's a lot of good things, a lot of good principles and learnings from for-profit, but this would never happen, like in a for-profit sort of environment where you'd promote your competitors or whatever it might be.
Well, they have the chamber. Sometimes they do. But you're right. I don't think if it's your direct competitor.
Right.
Like other realtors would not be promoting other realtors.
Right.
But if it's someone, if it makes sense, if it's a community partner and you can't do your work without them, then let your donors know, because it only serves you and it only serves that organization.
Absolutely. Well, Julia, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It was a great conversation. I was really looking forward to it. And thank you for joining and just dropping all sorts of knowledge for us today.
Thank you. I wish that it could be in person. I wish that we could hang out at a conference, but maybe in 2021.
Yeah, or 2025.
Right, maybe. Who knows?
But no, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful it's 2021. We'll see.
I know. I'm getting more hopeful, less hopeful. I don't know. But definitely some point.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Julia. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. This podcast is brought to you by your friends at Funraise, nonprofit fundraising software built by nonprofit people. If you'd like to continue the conversation, find me on LinkedIn or text me at 562-242-8160. And don't forget to get your next episode the second it hits the internets. Go to nonstopnonprofitpodcast.com and sign up for email notifications today. See you next time.